Hi, I'm Hriday, and in high school, I built and launched my own app that gained over 5,000 users within a month. But it crashed, so I had to take it down.
That sounds like both unfortunate, but I mean, now that it seems like years down the line, it's sort of a funny and interesting story to tell.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, two parts to the question. Like, part one is what was the app, and part two
Mhm.
is why did it actually crash?
Yeah, so to your first question, the app was called Anti-Torment. It was an anti-bullying app on school. And it was a SOS system for like in case you're getting bullied, you click on the SOS system and it sends reports to your teachers about
Mhm.
where you are, and it also records what's happening. So in case you need proof later,
Okay.
right? And this is also in case of school shootings, maybe fire drills, maybe a natural fire, something very urgent and serious. And it was actually, I did it as a part of my personal project.
Okay.
And my school really liked the idea and they ended up adopting it and using it. But I did not expect that much traffic and I had no idea how to use the servers. And so it just crashed and it was too complicated for me to figure out. So I just gave up. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm sure the app sounds very interesting. I'm sure it was a seven on the final 10. Uh, but yeah, so for everyone listening, this is Hriday Gondalia. He's a junior at USC, so the University of Southern California, right in the heart of Los Angeles, pursuing a degree in biopharmaceutical science. So that's quite a mouthful, and we'll be diving a little deeper into that on the episode. But today we'll just be hearing from him about choices he's made, the lessons he's learned along the way, as well as advice and insight to young high schoolers like yourself listening to the episode from your seniors as you embark on this exciting new phase of your life that we call like this big bold word that we're all a little intimidated by called university. So welcome to the podcast, Uni Unveiled. I'm your host, Arya Darod, currently studying at Minerva University. Welcome, Hriday, and I'm excited for the conversation.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on here.
Awesome. So you're an incoming junior, and it's up. I think you fly back to LA in about 2 weeks. It's
Mhm.
been a long summer break. I'm sure very eventful. What have been some of the highlights?
Yeah, so one highlight was my internship at Life Sciences Intellipedia. It's a data management company, but they also act as consultants for pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies in India. As you know, in the pharmaceutical industry, data is very important. It's what helps us make those decisions. So it was very cool to work with actual clients and other companies to help kind of shape the data into conclusions or decisions they should make, right? And the second thing is, once my internship was over, I was obviously working at my own pharmaceutical company called True Drug, where I have to wear a bunch of hats, do a lot of things. It's fun. Yeah, so that those were the highlights of my summer.
Lovely. Say a little more about your pharmaceutical company.
Okay, yeah. So my pharmaceutical company, True Drug Pharma, is a contract development and manufacturing organization, and we have a annual capacity of 7 billion units in the plant itself. And the general block we have is able to manufacture 1 crore tablets per shift, and you can have 3 shifts within a day.
Mm.
So we work in various areas such as oncology, hormones, antibacterials, generic formulations, injectables, and even nutraceuticals and cosmetics. Right, so it's a pretty big operation I'm running, and yeah, it's all been very exciting.
Very interesting. And if any, in what way did your USC experience, this could be like knowledge, resources, co-founders, did USC experience in any way help with starting and running the company?
Yeah, I feel like there's multiple opportunities at universities, not just in terms of what you learn. It's also in terms of the people you meet. So my co-founder right now is my dad, of course, and in terms of the relationships I've made in USC, with people in my field, I feel like it would help me out in the long term. Because this is my philosophy to it. You don't make connections when you need them. You make connections way before that.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I feel like in terms of that philosophy, I feel like in the future, I feel like USC would pay off a lot.
Yeah, I mean the vast alumni network plus all current interesting people you're with. And I want to emphasize cross domain, like not only people in a course like yours, but someone doing computer science or someone doing finance, someone doing
Right.
marketing. Those could all be part of your core team after. And so I think like the beauty of college is like bringing together among the best students across all these domains. So you've got the best writers and the best accountants, and in your case, like one of the best entrepreneurs. So, but say more about this philosophy might actually be like it. I think it seems like common sense, but I think too few people actually follow it in practice, and so most people end up actually making the connections when they need them. So, say more about that philosophy of making the connections before you need them and why that's important.
Yeah. Obviously, like if I had someone just coming up to me and asking me for something, my answer would most probably be a no, unless it was something very, very, very appealing, right? And I feel like that's what most people do. What you should really do actually is foster connections with these people, maintain them, and later, whenever you need help or they need help from you, I feel like it's a very easy to say yes, even though what their proposal might be is not the most appealing, right? So, in terms of that, I feel like this philosophy is very stable and also at the age we're currently at, you can make these connections very easily. All you have to do is just say hi to someone. You
Yeah.
don't really need to know what they do, why they do it, right? Like you're not a professional yet. So just make those informal connections. It's the golden opportunity. And university is just a melting pot of all these amazing, talented people. So why not just say hi to someone randomly?
Yeah, yeah. And I genuinely believe that, especially in college, it starts with a personal connection and then those become strong professional connections versus the other way around. And so, let's say someone like my roommate, who's probably like someone I know so well on a personal level, tomorrow, if we were to start a startup together, I know a lot of his like strengths and limitations, a lot of personal things about him. He won't feel weird about tomorrow telling me, I have no idea about XYZ topic. Please explain this to me from the ground up. Um,
Right.
so, yeah, I really like that. I think another thing I was told was sort of, especially when it's a professional, not from a college student, you wait until a certain amount of like meetings or getting to know the person before you make the first ask. Otherwise, it feels very transactional. So that number might be different for everyone. The number I was suggested was like three. So you do three meetings, and
Yeah.
at the end of the third meeting, you make an ask, whatever the ask is you want to make to that person. But yeah, I mean, I genuinely feel like going up to someone and just making the ask directly might feel transactional. You might not even get the best output from them as possible. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um,
You agree?
However, on the topic, do you want to say you've it's about 2 years at university for you, and so you've been with all these interesting people. I'm sure there are different events and networking events and conferences also, which you might be attending on the side. Do you want to say things about like this big word networking? Any reflections or things you've learned along the way?
Yeah, so I mean, networking events, like you find a lot of these opportunities, especially being in LA. It's a country, I mean, it's a city where there's a lot of things happening professionally, a lot of meetups for, okay, so just for more clarity, I love startups and I love the venture capital world. So there's a lot of meetings happening regarding this and also a lot of conferences regarding pharmaceuticals. And I have philosophies for both, right? The pharmaceutical networking events are more so about learning what the next big thing is, because these conferences hold so much value in terms of that information. Whereas venture capital world, it's completely different. It's not about what you know there, it's about who you know there, right? So it's it's about creating that community in venture capital that give you those deals, that help you source them or you help them source, right? So those are two very different things. So you need to have different skill sets, understanding of what your goal is with that event and what you're trying to get done. And that's how you approach it. You do your homework at home, and yeah, I feel like that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I like that. Like you do your homework at home. I also love like even if it's a mental list, like what are three things I want, what are three intentions or goals I have from this particular event? Why am I spending 2 days of my time there when I could have been doing anything else in the world? You sort of go in being very specific about if there's someone specific you really want to meet, some specific, like let's say there's three different talks going on at the same time. Which talk do you want to attend and why?
Mm.
Versus just being there and then sort of figuring it out, which I've had experience doing both. I can like certainly say that the first option is sort of you gain a lot more from that event overall.
Right.
Um, I also think I'm probably a perfect host for this episode because I've never heard this major biopharmaceutical science. So I'm
Mhm.
going to be asking you some very basic questions, but hopefully they're clarifying questions for anyone listening who maybe has an interest in bio or chemistry and is sort of
Mhm.
like, okay, what is this interesting major that Relay is doing? So
Yeah.
let's start with what exactly is this major? How is it different from a major like biomedical or biochemistry?
Hmm. Okay, so biopharmaceutical, according to me, would be more so the basic concepts I feel like are the same for all fields within healthcare, but it's just what you do with that information that differs with all of these different fields. I'd say biopharmaceutical is more related to put you in jobs regarding research, development, marketing, manufacturing of pharmaceuticals or any sort of product in the healthcare industry. Whereas biochem and sorry, what was the other field you mentioned?
Biomedical or biomechanical
Yeah,
engineering.
biochem, biomechanical engineering. Okay, so for biochem specifically would be more towards research and theoretical applications. And yeah, so like those different fields have their own nuances, but I can tell you about my major, and I feel like it's good to put you in positions regarding marketing, manufacturing, um, research, and development.
Hmm. Where did your interest in the whole industry begin? Like, did you have certain experiences or projects you worked on in high school which led you
Mhm.
to believe that, yes, this is something I'm really passionate about?
Yeah, so it started off with an internship in high school that I did at a contract research organization. Um, so I was working on a project for nitrofurantoin, which is a urinary tract infection
Hmm.
uh, medicine. And so we had to create a biosimilar, that is a drug which shows the same amount of drug in your bloodstream. So you need to compare it to a reference sample, and then you need to make your own drug, right? So all those levels, and so the drug gives you the same effect, right? So that was where my interest really started, like looking at all those scientists, shadowing them, making certain buffers for them, right? Like that was super fun, and I love the wet lab experience, right? So that's what started it, and then later, like as I got deeper into the rabbit hole, I found myself enjoying it a lot. So yeah, I just thought naturally this would be the best way to go ahead for university.
I'm assuming a lot of high schoolers listening, and I was in a very similar place in high school. Maybe they have a broader interest, so maybe someone knows that they want to do engineering, but they don't know which specific.
Mhm.
Or someone knows they love biology and they want to dive into it. They don't know what specifically they want to do in college.
Yeah.
Or someone in that position where let's say they've got a higher interest of biology or chemistry and this is what I like, but I don't know exactly what I want to do. Any suggestions in terms of how you go about narrowing down to that specific major or that specific
Yeah.
specialization in college?
Yeah, I feel like the best advice I could give is don't sit at home. Just do everything. Do every single thing you find interesting. And yeah, you'll figure something out, right? Like something will just like you just throw stuff at the wall, something will stick.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I did. Like I had internships in robotics, I actually really wanted to go into robotics, mechatronic engineering, right? But after doing a lot of internships, like that's when you figure out what is for you and what's not, because you're working with actual professionals who are working in that industry, and then you can see the pros and cons with your own eyes. If you don't do that, I feel like you will be stuck, or you will find out much later what you actually want to do. The best way and the quickest way is to just go and do internships.
Yeah, and I want to make a really big distinction between studying something like on a textbook or taking an online course versus going, sitting 9 to 5, shadowing a professional, doing an internship. Like, I think those are two different things. Many
Right.
things I enjoy studying on paper, and then I really hate the work which is
Hmm.
actually being done. So
Right.
both are important, but like neither can be neglected in that sense.
Yeah,
Is what
I
I say.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree, but I feel like what you do at the end is way more important than what you study. Yes, what you study might be interest. So if you naturally like what you're doing at the end, you'll find the studying interesting as well,
Mhm.
because like you said, it's not one. They're both not different. They're all connected to each other, right? So just using those theoretical concepts and applying it practically, that's the only difference. Like one's theoretical, one's practical, but they're all the same. So I feel like if you find the theoretical interesting, I feel like naturally you'll find the practical interesting as well.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Many, hopefully, one big myth which I'm hoping to break with you on this episode is that university is a time to sort of, and maybe this is true for like some people, I'll say, but that a lot of people think university is a time to be heads down, studying, focused on the GPA, in the classroom, getting all this content, and then graduating with a degree and a high GPA.
Yeah.
Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's a good path for someone who's maybe interested in going down the academia path, the research path, master's, PhD. Especially for someone who's getting into the world of work, what spending a year in San Francisco taught me was that most people will care a lot more about the projects you've built and the internships you've done versus your exact GPA in college. And so I think we, especially as Indian students, we tend to give it so much importance. Do you want to say two things here about like GPA versus all this practical stuff that you're involved in college?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, I love how you made that distinction between the goals people have in universities, whether they have a goal of going to academia and higher studies versus work, right? So GPA and internships, like you've hit the nail right in the head. I when I first went to university, I saw this distinction between people who wanted to do work, right? They were heads down, just studying, right? But my goals were very different because I had already started my company by that time. So like I was really looking to connect with other people who were more focused with work, right? So you have to make that distinction when you're in university to find out what your goals are. Yes, they may switch, but I feel like this main goal is what centers around your community and the friends you make later on.
Hmm.
Right? If you're academically interested, you'll make academically interested friends. If you're work interested, you'll make work interested friends. Right? I feel like that's how it goes naturally. I mean, yes, there's a few outliers, right? But yeah, so again, from my perspective, and of course, is biased to work, I'd say getting that GPA, getting work, grinding really hard is all for high school. Once you get into universities, you have to be focusing on internships, making those connections with professors, just doing everything you can to make your resume stand out. Like
Hmm.
that's your goal. Your goal is to get employed. Like no one cares. Like also hiring for my own company, I do not give a shit about anyone's GPA. I look at what work they've done,
Yeah.
what positions they've held, right? So yeah, feel like that's the crux of it at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, let's say if someone is still like, okay, how can I just totally disregard the GPA? I feel like it's important to think through and talk to people and have a cutoff and say, I'm going to get this, and then beyond that I don't care. That could be like, let's say out of a 4, that's a 3.4 or a 3.5 or 3.6. I feel like, let's say in my case, I have this cutoff that I want to get at least this much. Beyond that, I really don't care. all that extra time I'm going to be spending taking that from a 3.6 to a 4, which is a ton of time, like because of that 80-20 rule, I'm going to be
Yeah.
spending on side projects. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, something to.
Yeah, so actually you've made a good distinction. Thank you for catching me on that. Yeah, I mean, doesn't mean you let your GPA go, right? Like just because I don't look at a GPA doesn't mean like if you have a 3.0 on a resume, like I'll still look at that and be like, oh bro, like he doesn't
Hmm.
know anything. Right? Like I still look at a GPA, like of course there's like cuts. So after a 3.5, I don't look at the GPA anymore, right? I don't care if you have a 4.0 or a
Yeah,
3.5.
yeah.
Right, so I have that cutoff. You said that really well. So yeah, I mean like try to maintain your GPA or get above a certain level, but don't give up on it completely. So
Hmm. I want to say, even for high schoolers listening to this podcast or currently applying to universities, someone once gave
yeah.
me like this brilliant example which really stuck with me, about how, especially for US universities, if you're targeting the top ones, good grades are the prerequisite, which will get you to the first round. And then the second, third, fourth, and how many other rounds are left is all beyond. And so, someone once told me that to Stanford, if there's, let's say, 60,000 people applying per year, only 2,000 get rejected because of grades. So the other 58,000 go to the second round, and then all they're competing on is extracurriculars and essays and
Yeah.
interviews. So I think good grades are really a prerequisite, especially in high school. Grades are important, like won't deny, but it's so much more than that. That grades will
Yeah.
only get you to the first round, and then
Yeah.
it's extracurriculars and essays and 100 different things,
Yeah.
especially for the US, which is what I can speak well to.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Actually, I completely agree with you there. Grades are the prerequisite, but also in terms of extracurriculars, I'd kind of look into not doing the basic MUN. Those are these generic extracurriculars that you should avoid. And instead, do more unique extracurriculars. Like, for example, like for mine, I did rowing, right? So
Hmm.
that was an opportunity my school gave and I took it, right? So take those unique opportunities because every single one person would have MUN on
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
computers. So like that doesn't make you unique. You have to figure out what makes you unique, right? You need to catch the attention of the recruiter.
Yeah, absolutely. And this can be either your personal application, or if you'd like to go beyond and give examples. What are other examples of like niche and more interesting extracurriculars than the typical things that people do?
Yeah, so actually, I was aware of this distinction quite early on in university. I mean, sorry, in high school. So I kind of avoided um, those generic activities. Like, for example, I mentioned MUN. There's this other one called World Scholars Cup, right? Like they're handing out medals like candies. They're like I've seen like some of my peers get like 5 medals, and I was like, what's the value of a medal if you're getting so many, right? Um, but I can talk more on the unique ones I did. So there was this robotics competition. Like I said, I was interested in robotics, so I took this one competition called First Lego League. Right there, we ended up going into the international round. So that was a unique experience I had. The second one was being the youngest player on the football team. So I was in 10th grade playing with 12th graders for competitions. So like those kind of unique experiences where you've proven yourself to go above what is expected of you. I feel like those are the kind of experiences you really need to put on there.
Hmm. And I love when people like combine two maybe more common interests and like merge them together, and that becomes a super niche extracurricular. For example,
Mhm.
off the top of my head, football plus someone super into community service. And so you go and you, let's say, take football lessons for these different schools in
Yeah.
your village or your hometown. Something along those lines, I feel, versus just the football or just the community service.
Yeah.
It's a more basic example, but I feel like whenever you can combine like two of your interesting interests or passions,
Right.
those become like those niche areas that probably, even if like maybe there's a few other people who have something, but not like the hundreds or the thousands who have done. In your case, I think MUN is a good example to run with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to
So
go ahead.
actually, sorry to interrupt, but I want to go back to your thought on combining two interests to make a unique extracurricular. The example you gave was good, but what I personally would recommend is you go the extra mile, right? Like, don't just coach kids, like maybe create an entire agency if you can, like go the extra mile to impress the recruiter.
Hmm.
You don't need to do, like, I know, like, see, as someone coming out of high school, I'd expect so I have a younger sister. I'd expect my younger sister to be able to coach a few kids for football. She could just go at a playground and just start it, right? Like, it's easy. I want to do something that's I want to encourage her to do something that's way harder,
Hmm.
right? Like, that's not expected of her. Like, that's what I was trying to get at. Like, go the extra mile, right? Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, like surpass expectations, or always be thinking about how can you take this extracurricular to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. I love that. And I mean, even the beauty of such extracurriculars is that even beyond university, these will become interesting projects that you can speak about to anyone and everyone. And so tomorrow, when you go to like a networking event, or like even once you've graduated, you
Mhm.
remember I started this particular agency to teach football and Harvard. These are the numbers. So they make you a more well-rounded person overall, like beyond university, which is why a lot of people, I think of extracurriculars as this formula of like I do this great
Yeah.
university. Whenever you do something for the sake of it, it'll be a drain on your energy, is what I truly believe. Do it because you
Yeah.
love it, and do it because you know the benefits are much beyond getting into a great school. Like
Yeah.
they're an interesting person for life.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, a thought just hit me. So instead of doing these 10 extracurriculars, if you do this one really good extracurricular that has a lot of value, like, I feel like it'll take you a long way.
Okay, okay. Interesting. Everyone has that distinction in terms of like putting numbers on grades and
Mhm.
extracurriculars and essays.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanna really put you on the spot right now. And out
Yeah.
of 100, there's grades, there's extracurriculars, there's essays. What would be the numbers you put on each of them?
Yeah. I'd give extracurriculars about 45 or a 50. I'd give essay about 30.
Mhm.
Or honestly, you know what? Actually, I'll do essay and extracurriculars at 45, 45, and then I'll do grades at
Wow.
10. Like,
Okay.
but okay, hear me out. See, I'm not saying grades aren't important. They're like really important. That's the key that'll get you through the gate, right? But then once you're in, like, it's your essays and extracurriculars that speak for you. You gave a very interesting statistics. Only 20% of the students really get it through the first round, but then the rest of them get rejected after that. So, like, that's the point I'm trying to make. Like, grades is the benchmark you need to have to get in, right? But once you're in, like, you really need to express yourself to stand out. So that's what I'd focus on more.
I love talking about 80/20, especially on the application when there isn't unlimited time or you don't have unlimited energy. You don't have like an army of people doing 100 applications. So it's important to like be strategic, especially through those 2 years of high school, 11th and 12th. Um,
Mhm.
I set myself a cutoff. I was doing the IB. So 45 is the highest. I set myself a cutoff and said anything above 40 and I'm happy. So once I get the 40, I'm not putting in that extra effort to get the 43, 45,
Okay.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
And because
Yeah.
those few marks, and I mean, I think every high schooler would relate, those few marks that take you from the 80 to the 90 to the 95 to the 100, that's what
Mhm.
takes up the majority of the effort. And so that huge amount of time where I ended up getting an exact 40, that huge
Mhm.
amount of time I saved on those 5 marks versus someone who got the 45 helped me do
Mhm.
2x the extracurriculars and the activities and write beautiful essays. As
Yeah.
a recruiter, I'm not a recruiter, but just from whatever little I've understood, I feel like
Mhm.
they would choose the 40 student who has great extracurriculars and essays versus the
Mhm.
45 student who has made extracurriculars and hasn't put in personality into the essays.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a cutoff in terms of they wanted to get above a certain point, like maybe if you're below a 35, they won't even consider. But once you're beyond
Mhm.
that, and once you're competing with someone beyond the grades, it becomes the extracurriculars and the essays.
Yeah,
Um,
so I wanted to tie that back to the point I made about work, right? When you're looking at a resume, there's a point like I won't accept someone with a 3.0, but once they're above a 3.5, I don't look at the GPA
yeah.
anymore, right? So I feel like the same point goes here. Um, so yeah, there's a benchmark. Like, everyone has those. You can check on the internet what the benchmark is, what the average is for a Harvard student or a Stanford student. Like, that's what you need to have, right? But if you go above that, then there's no point, right? Like, just have that minimum or that average, and you're good,
Hmm.
right? So I'd kind of look at it that way, where you're literally applying for. I feel like those two processes are more or less the same.
Yeah.
I'd say, um, because like there's a cutoff anyways. So once you get through that, like whatever your target school is, like work on extracurriculars. I feel like if you look at it that way, it's already too late to work on extracurriculars because see, you need to be working on both of those things throughout ninth grade. Needs to start ninth, right?
Absolutely.
Like a lot of people, even counselors will tell you like your real work starts ninth. Right?
Mm.
Most people don't take it seriously until they're in 10th grade and it's time to go to 11th and 12th. So I'd say like get working at ninth, like set yourself up so it's easier for you in 12th grade to kind of have that unique story.
Honestly, probably the single biggest mistake I made was actually putting pedal to the metal only once 11th grade started, and that left me with so little time. Thankfully, I
Mm.
had certain activities I had done without even thinking of college during my ninth and 10th, so I could put in. But 11th and 12th, also with the stress of academics, and half of your 12th will be going in the applications. Ninth and 10th, that time where academics also aren't so intense or stressful. Beautiful time to be working on like hobbies and passions and various extracurriculars, especially if you
Mm.
have in your mind that like you have some target schools just I want to get in here, here, here. I feel like all those people, most of those people who achieve success at least start thinking through ninth and then get to work at least at the beginning of 10th.
Yeah.
No harm starting early. This applies to extracurricular. I think it also applies to your applications when you
Mm.
actually get to work on them. Um,
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you, what do you think? Are there any big mistakes you feel that you made during the entire application process? And this sort of becomes a caution advice to someone listening who's currently working on the application.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest regret I have to this day is not applying to the Ivy Leagues. Like, I didn't really challenge myself with my applications. Like, I applied to 12 universities, I got into 10, right? So I feel
Okay.
like the rate should be more like you apply to 12, you should get into like 7 or 8. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I went too easy on myself. And okay, so the actual story was I was working with a counselor, right? So like I kind of figured I didn't figure out what the distinction of goals was. I wanted to get into the best university. What they cared about was getting me into a university. So like they took easy universities for me that I could for sure get into, so they can show like a huge success rate with their student admissions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like sometimes trusting your counselor isn't the best thing. Like make your own choices with your universities. Do the research yourself. I know it's tough, but just make that list yourself. Right? Challenge yourself with those. Um, and yeah, this is what I tell my sister every single day. Right? Like just challenge yourself. Like aim Stanford, Harvard. I know counselors will tell you like, oh, that's too unrealistic. Just do it.
Yeah.
Like they don't care about your future. At the end of the day, they care about the money. So like
Mm.
just go for it.
You never know. I had a Harvard student on your podcast, and
Hmm.
we spoke about how she got rejected from all the other seven Ivy Leagues and got into only Harvard.
Yeah.
So there, I will admit there's some level of randomness to the whole process. So that's why sort of, if it's possible for you, I know it's also a financial cost, but it makes sense to
Hmm.
cast like a wider net and
Yeah.
apply not even like one IV and two or three, because you really never know. There's all these random tiny things that an admission officer is looking for, which we as a student will find it very difficult to know because we're not
Hmm.
on the other side of that table. But yeah, and I actually want to dive a little deeper with you on this because I'm sure for many people there's that fear of rejection and fear of hearing that
Hmm.
no. And I'm sure there are anxious like days and weeks of checking the inbox every day, and that
Hmm.
becomes like emotionally challenging. So I'm guessing part of that was also a reason you did not sort of challenge yourself to apply to those IVs.
Hmm.
What would you say to a student like that who's really worried about hearing the no and doesn't even like put in the effort because of that?
Yeah, I feel like it's a saying me and my friends have. You miss every single shot you don't kick, right? Like you have to kick it. Like you don't know if it'll go in or not, but at least you kicked it. Like it'll go in by mistake. It's still a goal. So I mean, like I know there's a lot of chances, but if you don't just take whatever like risk you take, right? If you don't take it, then there's no chance you'll get in. It's a zero, right? But if you at least apply, like there's some chance it'll be there, right? The acceptance letter might come. So I feel like you have to think about it from a perspective of just taking chances. Like life is a game of probability. You just have to play the numbers and yeah, like see where life takes you. Everything is just a numbers game at the end of the day. So take your chances.
Interesting. And that's totally the reason why we have a distinction on the application of dream universities or reach universities, best fit
Hmm.
universities, and then safety universities.
Hmm.
Because if nothing works out, you have the safety, and if everything works out, you've got the dream. Like that's why there's a division. I think the number I was given was like one third, one third, one third. So let's say I'm applying to 15, it's about 5, 5, 5. Everyone can have the numbers in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad we said this on the podcast. I think honestly that's a great and a pretty positive, inspirational note to end off this first section of the episode. Before university, we dived into sort of what got you into biopharmaceutical science. We talked a bit about the application. Want to move and fast forward a little bit to your USC base, and it's been 2 years, so you're about halfway through the journey now. And so yeah, we'll dive a little deeper into some specifics. But I would love to start with a higher level question, which is, do you feel that there's anything specific that I'm sure you've got friends in different universities across the US and you keep hearing about their experiences? Any
Right.
specific factors that you think makes USC unique as a school compared to these other schools?
Hmm. I feel like USC as a university is very diverse, especially in terms of its international student population. I feel like it has the biggest in America, I'm assuming. I mean, not assuming actually, I read a stat, but it was kind of a while ago. So, yeah, I feel like it's very unique in terms of the people you find there. And I feel like every university says that. And I won't go fact check all of them, but I can fact check in USC because I go there. And the amount of diversity and the amount of inclusion there is absolutely surreal. Like, uh, like coming from India into university, I was kind of uncomfortable at first, right? But yeah, like going into USC, like just like it was super smooth transition. Felt very included. So yeah, like in terms of culture perspective, it's very inclusive. In terms of opportunities, multiple opportunities. I have like a lot of friends doing startups. I have a lot of friends doing academia. I have a lot of friends doing everything in between, right? So yeah, I feel like in terms of USC being unique, it's the diversity there, it's the opportunities there, it's of course the weather there, one of the best in America, right? Sunlight 100% of the time. Like it's just so good to just sit out under a tree in the sun, watch a few squirrels running around, and just reading a book, those simple pleasures, and that to doing that during winter. So yeah, like not all universities can say, or not all students can say they can do that. I'm hinting to my friends in New York who are absolutely dying during winter. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Weather becomes one of those things that we say, oh, like it'll work out. I can go anywhere. I can adjust. Some people can, some people can't.
yeah,
I genuinely feel like everyone should be putting a slightly higher consideration on the weather of the place they're going to. In some cases, that's genuinely the difference between a friend who you choose to study in California versus like a Boston or a New York, because they just can't spend 4 years of their life in that cold, day in, day out. So just
yeah,
keeping that at the back of the mind, which many of us in high school didn't do. I genuinely didn't do that before going to San Francisco for Minerva. Um, but that becomes
yeah.
that becomes second home as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. Honestly, like I did put consideration to where I was going in terms of weather as well. And I'm so happy I did that because being in the cold, like there's less sunlight, it's super cloudy, it gets very depressing.
Mm.
Like, and I hate the rain for that specific reason in India because it gets dark and it's very dull and I don't feel like doing anything.
Yeah.
So like that weather impacts you more than you think, and you said that really well. So take weather into consideration,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. For
Yeah,
sure. Want to also speak about the what I think is an incredible location of the campus, in the heart of the city of LA, and so you're surrounded by opportunity, like literally and metaphorically. And so
mm,
I was wondering if you could tell us a little about how you engage with the city as a university student, and this could be both personal and professional.
right. I mean, there's a lot to do in LA, right? Like, I have friends in small cities for university, and they say it's very boring. There's nothing to do there. And that's why I prefer big cities over small cities, especially in LA. Like, the culture is very different. If you look at LA and New York, like, it's very different. New York, you can walk around everywhere, but in LA, you have to take a car to get places, right? So there's those small changes, but I feel like overall, personally, I'd prefer a big city over a small city any day. Like, imagine someone going to Purdue, right? There's nothing to do there. It's in the middle of nowhere, right? So, and I feel like this impacts the work culture as well. I mean, the work opportunities you get, because like if you're in a big city, there's so many things happening outside, right? Like LA Tech Week happening, right? Like I could go because it's in LA, right? If I was in Purdue, right? Like I could not go to LA for the Tech Week, right? So it's based on your personal interests as well, of course. Like if you want to go, like for my personal interest, like biopharmaceutical science in the healthcare industry, you could either go to the extreme west coast or the biotech triangle in on the east, right? Like those are the two best places, right? I know, like in terms of that, I did consider New York, but for weather purposes, I came down to the West Coast, and the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industry is pretty good here too. Like if especially you go down to San Diego, right? So in terms of that, you have to be very strategic with where you want to be. Even if it's a bad university right next to Harvard, you're still working with Harvard students. You're meeting them on a daily basis, right? So kind of consider that location. It's very important, right?
Yeah, very true. Some people might thrive at a Purdue in the middle of nowhere and they want the peace. Some people might thrive at a bustling city. Again, a factor which many of us don't consider. Like, we've gotten into this great school, let's just pack up the bags and go.
Yeah.
But I think like weather, location, this becomes second home, as I'm reiterating again and again. Um, what are other, you can speak to UST specifically, but I'm sure this might generalize beyond just like to other universities as well. What are other underrated resources at USC?
I'd say clubs. Clubs are the second most underrated I mean, sorry, resources at universities. Because it's a place where you can find like-minded people already there for you in a community that's maybe spanning decades for all you know, right? Depends on how old the club is, of course, right? But these are separate schools in and of themselves, I'd say, right? Because these have their own alumni networks, these have their own points of interest, something they're teaching you. So I'm in this club called Sigma Eta Pi, which is, it's not a frat, which I get a lot of, but it's a entrepreneurship society, right? And my first year at university, or my first semester, I was finding it very hard to make friends and those connections because I didn't know where to go, right? Like I said, there's a distinction between academia and work. But in my specific major, most people want to go into academia. So I was kind of stuck with people in academia who didn't share the same interests, right? So I was kind of feeling lonely. So that's when I looked at clubs around campus and I saw what work oriented clubs there were. So yeah, Sigma Eta Pi hit my radar, applied, got in, and one of the best decision of my life. Like I've made so many friends. Every year you get to make new friends because people are joining the club, right? So it's a ensured way you meet new people on campus with the similar interests you have. So yeah, I'd definitely recommend joining clubs freshman year. Like go out of your way to join these clubs, and also like don't apply to 10 clubs, of course. Apply to the three most important ones that align with your goal and yeah, align with your values. That's it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, very true. And I think being part of such a huge university where maybe students feel like they're lost or they're lonely, finding these like smaller communities with shared interests, these could be academic, these could be non-academic as well. But these sort of become smaller friends groups and smaller families, and then you can take specific people at those clubs out for coffee or out for lunch, and that's how a friendship sort of begins
Yeah,
from.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, totally agree. And especially as like a second, third year student, I feel like many people get stuck with that close group of friends.
Mhm.
So I feel like it takes conscious effort to be constantly going out, meeting new people. And as you said, clubs are a great way to do that because at the very least, there's new people joining in every year, which could be the freshmen or even the upperclassmen who have an interest.
Yeah,
So
and a point I'd like to add to that is, especially since you brought up making friend groups and like having that group, I'd say like don't stick to one specific group. That's why like one thing I heard when I was going to university is you have to make friends in freshman year, because like once those groups like go through sophomore year, you start making less friends. Junior year, you start making even less friends. So you get more solidified within that one group, especially if you don't reach out to someone. So it's very necessary to reach out in freshman year to as many people as you can. Yes, some people may kind of, like just go, or some people you'll meet, so like there's a lot of that happening. But as you go on throughout the years, you'll find a more stable group or stable groups, right? So yeah, it's all a filtering process. It's very natural. So I'd recommend you join as many clubs in the start, so you kind of boost that process, right? Because you're already finding filtered people who have the same values and goals as you. Yeah.
I think starting early, taking initiative pays off a ton. And so, if I were to just give my example, I was honestly pretty jobless during that summer break before university, which I think is good. Take that time to relax and recuperate before.
Yeah.
Um, One great thing I invested in, which I did for fun during that summer break, which but has paid off so much over the first year, is I got on one-on-one video calls with like 50 plus of my classmates at Minerva. Just nerded out about interests, talked common passions, talked about their different cultures and countries they come from, anything
Mhm.
at all. Why
Yeah.
Minerva? What are their goals? Just any possible topic like under the sun. And
Mhm.
then when I landed in San Francisco, the beauty was that many people approached me and mentioned to me that I was the very first Minervan they spoke to. And so that impression is really formed for a very long period of time.
Mhm.
That effort to go and say hi to someone before they say hi to you
Yeah.
have sort of formed that initial impression. And that is something that they'll remember for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
So there's tons of dynamics in terms of friends groups, especially over first semester, first year.
Mhm.
But over time, it solidifies provided you put in the effort early. If you're sort of wandering and you're trying to like be an acquaintance to everyone, not investing in some deeper relationships here and there, I feel like that kind of bites you, especially as you get to second year and people sort of figure out their group and their code.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
for sure. Another third thing I'd add to the list of underrated resources at university, especially American universities, I think is the value and the power of electives to go beyond your course, to take interesting courses in different fields, to learn like more broad and high level life lessons that can generalize to either your career or your life. And so you've done some
Mhm.
very, very interesting electives at USC. Would love to talk through them. But I mean, the focus and what I'm really interested in hearing about is whether they taught you something which has generalized and come back to either your working life or your life outside of work and just life lessons at large.
Yeah, so I mean, I take electives just to unwind and relax. I mean, I'm not trying to learn something. I'm just trying to kind of go towards my goals. Like for example, like one example I can give you is my freshman year. I took weightlifting and self defense because like I was pretty chubby when I went into university. So like my goal was to get fit, right? So of course I set goals for myself at the beginning of the year, and I used electives as tools to learn, right? Because of course there's online courses, but if your university has those courses, I'd highly recommend you take them, because having that so my coach in weightlifting, like I still see him at the gym every single day, and if I'm doing something wrong, he'll tap me on the shoulder, maybe give me a whack once a while, and like he tell me you're doing it wrong, so I mean that lifelong connection even with those professors in those electives, right? That kind of matters too, right? Self defense as well. As you know, downtown LA is not the safest place. It's like you have to know certain things. So like with that goal in mind, I picked that elective. What that taught me was, of course, to kind of stand your ground, just have that inner calm, like also I took sailing, which was something I was really interested in because it's such a unique course my school was giving. It's not there any in any other school. You actually get a license to uh, I forgot what the license was called, but you get a license by the Coast Guard to operate your own sailing ship if you want to later, right? And I feel like even when I applied to Purdue, right? Purdue was one of the schools I applied to. Um, One thing that was really appealing for me was their flying classes that they have. Like they have their own airport, right? So like that was one elective I really wanted to take. So I feel like you have to take these electives just for the sake of interests. If you have any like interest that you want to pursue besides academic ones, I highly recommend electives, even like public speaking. So, I mean, I haven't written this down, but I'm also going to take an elective called Introduction to Stand-up Comedy. Right. I mean, if I could learn stand-up comedy, that'd be great. I mean, of course, like it's just those diverse experiences, what you get to learn. I couldn't put a name to what I've learned over the time, but I feel like changes in me in terms of how interesting I am. Like I could always pull out my sailing class card and talk to someone about it, right? I could always pull out my weightlifting class, weight training class, and talk to someone about it. Also, like one thing I used my weight training class for was to make some money, right? Like I started a side hustle in school. I was making workout plans, diet plans, and based on someone's BMI, their fat, their fat goals, what goal they wanted to have their body fat at. So I made a lot of money off of these classes as well because it's such an interest of mine, right? So yeah, just go in with an open mind, learn whatever, right? Like there's, and even if you don't want to learn anything out of it, like I'm sure you learn something. And yeah, it's just all based out of pure interest.
Yeah, again, speaking of being a well-rounded person beyond just university, and so tomorrow, once you've graduated, I mean, you're out and you're speaking to someone, you're unable to connect with them on, let's say, the work you do, but you've done sailing and you've done weightlifting and you've done stand-up comedy, you know how to crack a good joke. Just in terms of forming like relationships, I feel like the more hands you get yourself into, the more potential people you can connect with after
Yeah,
universities. The way
yeah.
I um, and so interesting. I had a conversation with someone who graduated about 4 years ago from USC. Said that stand-up comedy was probably one of her most. She was an architecture major, but she said that stand-up comedy was probably one of the most memorable electives. And today, when she's giving pitches and presentations to like investors or customers, she
Yeah,
remembers that class so much because it helps her lighten the mood and crack a good joke in the beginning. So you never
right.
know what comes in handy like a few years down the line.
Yeah,
Um,
completely agree.
um, especially for someone listening to the episode who's into biochemistry, interested in the interesting biopharmaceutical science major you talked about, I'd love to dive into some more details of that. And so, from what I've heard, you've got an interesting mix of theory and practical and lab work. And so, on a specific level, how does that look in terms of how your class is structured? How is your course structured? Plus, I would love to hear more about just the lab experience.
Okay, so to give you a better idea of uh, the lab work and the specific dynamics of a course in STEM, right? I'd look at BISC 220. This is a class I took. It was about the body and the different systems we have, right? So for that, we have two things. We have a class, a lecture, and a lab, right? So we have two lectures and one lab per week. And in the lab, we have questions. So first they run us through some slides about the topic, and this corresponds to what we learned in class before, right? And then we do a small lab that takes about 2 hours, right? And we jot down our results, give it to the TA there, and make them sign it. And yeah, so that's how it generally works in terms of the assignments. You have your class assignments, but you also have lab assignments where you have to write a lab report once in a while, and this changes between different classes. For biology, there's a standard set of work you have to do. For chemistry, there's a specific set of work. Chemistry, I've heard, is much more harder, and I'm saying I've heard because I got to skip chemistry because of the credits I got from high school. But what my friends tell me, they have a pre-lab they have to do, which they have to answer questions, and they have a post-lab which they have to do, which is almost like the normal lab work you see in IB, right? Like the research question, method, all that. So I feel like it depends from university to university. I feel like even it depends from class to class. But if you've done like IB uh, STEM class, right? I feel like it's you already learned the basics. I'd say you're like way ahead of other university students because this is the exact basics they discuss and you have to write. So yeah, overall, I'd say it's pretty similar to high school.
Okay. It's so leading off of is pretty similar to high school. I'm sure there are key similarities and differences, and I always love to touch upon that because some of my friends have said that there's a big gap between like the high school classes they take, which could be IB or other classes,
Mhm.
versus university classes are somehow structured very differently for them. So specifically for your major, I'm sure your IB high school classes, I'm assuming, were also STEM classes, and so I'm guessing you did a biology and a chemistry in your IBDP. How any key distinctions or differences which might have like caught you off guard between IB high school classes versus the university classes that you took at USC?
Okay, so in terms of the IB classes, like I feel like it's very similar to university classes. It's just that there's no one to tell you what the due date is. There's no one to chase behind you to kind of submit it.
Yeah.
Like if you submit, good for you. If you don't, like you get a zero. Like, no one's gonna. The professor doesn't care really because there's like 1,000 other students there. But I feel like it's very similar to IB. I feel like IB just prepares you for university much better. um, like I feel like the only difference would be in the grading criteria. Like you don't, I don't remember that well, but you have like certain sub criterias under. There's like a B, C, D, and there's like sub criterias under there, right? So I feel like that's different, right? You have a rubric, just read the rubric, and yeah, just submit your assignment
Yeah.
accordingly. I feel like it's pretty simple, very similar to IB. Yeah,
This must be super reassuring, especially for listeners who are currently doing the IB in high school. And so
yeah.
maybe we'll spend 2 minutes more here. In what ways did your IB classes or sort of some skills you developed through the process of doing the IB prepare you well for USC classes?
Yeah, I mean, not just USC. I feel like any university is like the assignments are more research based, right? Like you have to do your own research and you have to write your essays. And of course, I tests as well, right? But there's a combination of that in IB. Like I cannot talk on other boards because I haven't done other boards. Um, so what I can say for IB is that the system you have of your assignments, doing your own research, writing it down in an essay, kind of reworking that essay, the drafts, right? So like those kind of processes are the same for university, like and the timeline also one very important thing, like how you approach assignment is the biggest thing that IB teaches you, right? Like it teaches you that framework, the time you should take to get an assignment done. Especially, I mean, I was a pretty serious student. Like I kind of was grinding a lot, right? So like it taught me the timeline. Like if I had a week to finish an assignment, like I have to start on that first day. I cannot, like if I do have 4 days for the assignment, like yes, you can still do it, but the quality won't come out as well because you have to draft it. That I learned through IB, right?
Hmm.
So like those lessons in doing those assignments, you learn the small nuances, the skills you need to have. IB teaches you that really well.
Yeah, I think a big learning curve for many students at university, and maybe this is more true for non-IB students entering, like, let's say, US university, is when you've got this huge assignment or this huge paper to turn in, how do you break that down into like more manageable steps? Like, this is step one, this is step two, this is step three, this is the timeline. I'm going to give myself X number of days for each step. That becomes a learning curve. Like, you learn, and with practice, you do get much better. But at first glance, like that can feel daunting. But as IB students, we've done like these huge IAs
Mhm.
and extended essays.
Yeah.
So we feel sort of used to that. For a
Yeah.
non-IB student, these are my thoughts. Feel free to let me know whether you agree, disagree, or you have anything to add. I feel like three big things to focus on if you're, let's say, a non-IB student aiming to go to a US university. Number one is being able to read dense text, like an academic paper or a long PDF, being able to stay engaged, focused, learning those note-taking strategies. Number two is writing skills, being able to comfortably write 1,000 words, 2,000 words, not be repeating yourself, have a decent level of vocabulary and grammar, and know how academic writing is like so different from the creative writing which many of us might be used to in school. Number three is research, as you said, like being able to go through scholarly sources, knowing those basics of plagiarism and fabrication, avoiding all of those basic mistakes, and knowing how to conduct like academic research, how to vet a source in terms of like we've got those acronyms. But those would be the three ones from my end: reading, writing, and great research skills. Do you feel like you have
Yeah. So I partially agree and disagree with that, right? What I agree with is the third skill you mentioned, plagiarism, research.
okay?
Those two things are the most important things, right? But reading and writing specifically, now that AI has come, right? Like if you're updated with that technology, you could save a lot of time as a university student. That's also one more thing I'd recommend. Kind of stay updated with technology. Like I know, like a lot of students believe it's not ethical to use AI, but I mean, as a professional, you're gonna be using AI, right? You have to optimize for your time, and that's also what IB teaches you. You have how you optimize for your time, right? Like you have 10 assignments, you have to finish all of them on a specific due date. You have to optimize. So one general rule, at least that I keep for myself, is finish the assignment before it's due,
Yeah,
so you can ask a professor to read it once
yeah,
and give you feedback.
always.
So yeah, I mean that's something I learned. So you have to create your own lessons like that, right? And yeah, use technology. You know, if wherever you're like feeling a lack of skill, like if maybe writing is not for you, like use AI. I'm not encouraging plagiarism or cheating, but use AI, but kind of read through it and make sure you understand it. And I know you can now catch AI writing, so kind of paraphrase. So I'm not encouraging cheating. I'm just kind of teaching them to optimize their time, right? It's important as a university student. So yeah,
Yes.
that's
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that. This is a podcast by students and for students,
Mhm.
and so it's. I've had a lot of people say something which maybe a college counselor wouldn't be super happy to hear on the podcast, but for a
Mhm.
student, there are certain pro tips. Like for university, there are things which maybe like your college counselor might disagree with, your parent might disagree with.
Mhm.
Ultimately, I think at the very end, what's crucial is that you're learning the content, you're understanding the concepts on a deep level, and you're overall, whatever your definition of success is at university, you're optimizing for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's important to keep in mind in terms of the ethical way I look at it.
Mhm.
Um, Finer details are sort of each to their own, I would say. And like
Yeah.
we enjoy the suggestions. Everyone might have their own level of comfort with some of these suggestions, which is perfectly okay. Uh,
Mhm.
Before we sort of begin wrapping up this episode, I would love to touch on for a moment with you just negative and positive emotions at university. And so I'm sure it's a roller coaster of a ride with like so many highs and lows, also being halfway around the world and away from family and the place where you grew up. So
Mhm.
there's like different elements of homesickness and food sickness and missing a lot of different things.
Yeah.
How do you personally deal with like the difficult days or the downtimes at university?
Yeah. So I'm going to take this point by point. Firstly, I'm going to talk about like being away from home, right? Second, I'll talk about the food, right? That's a big thing. Third, I'll just talk about the cultural differences, I'd say is a pretty big thing. So yeah, these three things. So just being away from home, like, yeah, it's difficult. But I mean, in my situation, I was put in a boarding school since fifth grade. I was like 10 years old. I've been living by myself since I was 10,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I've learned a lot of lessons, especially when I was very young, right? I feel like there is some sort of a mindset that like once you go there, you'll never be able to see home again. Right? I feel like that needs to go in the trash, right? You're gonna go back home after, like, be realistic about it. You're gonna be home after maybe like 3 months. You can go for winter break, you can go for summer break, right? You can take those vacations, you can go back home, right? It's not permanent, you're not in a permanent situation. Second, one thing I really like to do is just take a walk outside, because that's a good opportunity to just bump into friends and like just talk, right? Because the worst thing you can do is just lock yourself in a room when when you're in a mood like this. So
Hmm.
I'd say just walk outside, be in the sun. You'll feel much better.
Yeah.
Uh, a big part of it is also food. Like food was one thing that was really hard for me to deal with, especially being a vegetarian in America. And I like working out, so like especially the protein problem. I'm just like raving for protein everywhere I go. um, so one thing about that is just learn how to cook, right? Like ask your mom to kind of show you your favorite dishes, how to cook them, and like be more open with just spending your time cooking your own food. I feel like that's the best way to go about it. Cooking is an essential skill. And if you're really craving, like I crave Indian food when I'm there, right? So like I just order, like order whenever you're craving something. Like don't beat yourself about it, because if you don't, then you'll feel much worse later, right? So yeah, and the third point I was going to talk about was the culture, right? Yes, there's a lot of cultural differences between India and America, but rest assured, there's other people. Like again, you said university is a big place, right? Like it's like a mini world, I'd say. Everyone's there. Like there's a lot of cultures there. I'm sure you'll find your people, right? You just have to be patient. Patience, I feel like, is the biggest skill you learn in university. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, I'm glad we touched on three very distinct and very real problems. We also touched on homesickness, food sickness, which I think is not often homesickness includes food sickness, but it's important to differentiate the two.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm glad we touched upon negative and positive emotions and getting yourself out, because
Mhm.
it also is like so important as a skill. For me, whenever I was down at home, there's always family to sort of cheer me up and get me into a better state. Learn to do that for yourself on your own, which is necessary so many times in life, is so important. Like you become a stronger person when by yourself. Even I totally agree with going out taking a walk, but even if for whatever reason you're in the room alone, able to like switch on and switch off,
Yeah.
and turn yourself back into the positive state, because sometimes you just have to, when there's an assignment due tomorrow and in a negative emotion, that you somehow have to grind through it and then maybe let yourself experience all those emotions.
Yeah,
So
I
all
completely agree. Completely agree with you. I feel like, yeah, you're your biggest supporter. Like, also, one more philosophy I have is you live alone and you die alone. So, like, don't give a shit about anything else that happens. You have to be your own supporter. You have to figure out how to deal with the problems and uh, the different challenges, rejection, right? Like I said, those things like will come up like very frequently. So, it's best to learn and deal, you know. So, yeah.
Hmm. You brought up something a very important life skill, which is patience. And I think so many ways university can teach you to be more patient,
Mhm.
especially optimizing for like long-term results. Like short-term results, I think are easy to optimize for. But
Mhm.
even for this podcast, I keep thinking about in the long term, and assuming that this becomes big, I want to be making sure that I'm paying attention to detail and doing all those tiny things to
Mhm.
optimize for like long-term success.
Yeah.
What
Mhm.
has being patient looked like for you over the last 2 years at USC? And again, any reflections through this journey?
Yeah, I feel like patience would be, I feel like so many aspects. I feel like all of university could apply to patience. If I'm looking at a specific situation in my life, I'd say friends was a big problem for me. Like I mentioned earlier, like I was pretty lonely my first semester at USC. Like because I was naturally an introvert, and even in high school I was very introverted. So like I was yet to come out of my shell and talk to people. So like my freshman year, like I wasted half of it just being to myself, talking to two three people, and I feel like I was never gonna make a lot of friends. So like one thing that I really learned about was patience in terms of the people you will meet, right? Like don't expect too much of yourself, like sometimes I feel like having high expectations is negative in a way, because if you end up disappointing yourself, it'll kill your morale, you know. So I feel like have realistic expectations, and this way patience kind of teaches you that lesson. You know, you go into university thinking it'll be this and that, and like, you know, there's so many expectations, and patience will teach you to how to make those expectations kind of realistic. Feel like that's at the core of, like, because if I summarize all of it, like I said, all of university is just patience, but if I try to summarize that, like, that is what it would be,
At the
right?
crux. Yeah.
It's about your expectations, and kind of patience will teach you how to make those realistic. That's what I can tell you overall.
We learn a part outside of the classroom. I feel like we learn so many life lessons at university. I genuinely feel like it's this bridge between a teenager and an adult.
Mm,
So this is like for many people, literally universities when they become an adult. And I think on a higher spiritual level, I feel like this is genuinely like slowly letting off those guardrails and getting
mm,
into the world of being an adult and graduating as like a fully functioning, autonomous, and confident young man or woman or
yeah.
adult into the real world. A very, very direct question for you as an introvert. Do you feel like the university experience is more difficult for an introvert versus an extrovert in some ways?
I feel like university will force you to interact, right? And it's on you to take those opportunities or not. Uh, all the resources are available at your fingertips. It's about your mindset and your decision making, right? Uh, yeah, like I feel like honestly, as an introvert, you could survive university, but you won't get the value out of it as an introvert, you know. Because university, I personally, like, honestly, I didn't even want to go to university, but my main selling point was the people I will meet there, right? So, I mean, there's no value to the university if you can't meet other people. You know, like if you're just going for studying, just do an online course and get over with it. Why are you paying so much, you know? So I'd say, as an introvert, you have to kind of force yourself to interact. I know it's not comfortable. Also, take electives that help you interact, like introduction to stand-up comedy, you know, like it will help you get on a stage, right? Talk to people, kind of help you figure out, like you said, life lessons is like at the core of university. And I feel like just challenging yourself and learning those lessons is how you make the most out of university as an introvert.
This is very important. So I'm going to dive a little deeper here with you, especially as someone who described himself as an introvert in high school before coming to university. For someone who's very introvert and very shy, and I'm sure it's not like one day I'm an introvert and then the next day this flip is switched and I'm this suddenly this person
Yeah.
who comes and socializes with everyone. But it's a very, very gradual, slow and steady process.
Mhm.
How do you make that switch? Like, how do you go from your bubble to being someone who can actually go and start conversations with random people on
Yeah. Yes. So there's no switch you can flip. That's the one thing I'd like to point out. It's a very slow and gradual process, and half of the time you don't even know, you don't even realize it's happening. I didn't even realize like how I got comfortable talking to people. You know, I feel like it was, now that I look back on it, was more so joining clubs and just interacting with people with similar interests that kind of got me out of my shell. You know, because university is about talking to your friends, talking to friends of friends. You know, it's like the entire loophole of social. There's so many dynamics in there. You know, so like, it's just like gradual. You won't even feel it happening, but it will happen if you just force yourself to, like, just interact with one more person a day. I feel like that'll make the difference.
Yeah, that's a good goal. Like one person a day. Setting goals even for social interaction. Like I know a lot of us think like, why would you put numbers and goals to things like a
Mm,
friendship? But I feel at some level it makes a lot of sense. I have a goal of at Minerva every
mm,
week. I'm gonna take two people who I haven't spoken to much out for lunch or coffee or a
mm,
walk, and that is like probably the one of the best things and decisions I've made over the first year at Minerva. So
yeah.
especially with something difficult, feel like setting a goal, one new person a day, one new conversation a day. Those are like tiny steps. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I actually haven't been able to like bring this up on the podcast and do justice. But for
Mhm.
listeners who are interested, you actually are running your own podcast. So there we go in
Yeah.
terms of introvert to podcaster.
Yeah.
We make sure to put in a link as well as a short summary of the podcast in the episode description. So anyone
Sure.
interested can go ahead and check that out.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, for sure. I mean, like just to elaborate more on the podcast since you brought it up,
sure.
it's a biotech podcast called It's Bigger Than Biotech. And I specifically made this for people who want to get into the industry and want to figure out because this industry is so big, you can have so many jobs with like for your specific skill set, right? So we bring on professionals, we ask them about the decisions they made. It's pretty much your podcast, but the next stage,
Yeah.
right? From university to getting hired,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I know I'm a big reader, but I know so many of my friends like will not touch a book, but they really enjoy listening to
Yeah.
podcasts while they're on a walk or on a run.
Mhm.
And I'm also assuming like this was a very different experience for you being in the guest seat for a change.
Yeah.
And I was able to give you sort of that change of experience from being like a host. So yeah, as we begin wrapping up, just so listeners have an idea of where you're going in terms of fast forwarding a few years from today with a degree from USC in biopharmaceutical science, what do you see yourself doing post graduation?
Yes, of course. The one answer I have is, of course, running my business, but I also have a few interests out of it. Like I said, venture capital. So maybe like starting a venture capital firm, right? Like even the podcasts I do, like just doing that podcast, getting better guests, getting better traction, so those things, and maybe like honestly, I cannot tell you about the future, because one thing I've learned is you don't know what the future holds,
Mhm.
right? Like I could be in a completely different direction. I don't know, right? That's also one thing university taught me is open-mindedness. Just go with the flow. Don't stick to something.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, that would be my answer.
Perfect. Yeah. And I've had the full range of answers. Like I've had people in third or fourth year saying they genuinely don't know what they want after graduation. They're still figuring it out. And I have people first year, second year, very clear. So there's the whole spectrum, but
Yeah.
being open minded for sure is like a highlight of this episode and a lot of other episodes. I think um, we enter university with a lot of like preconceived notions,
Mm,
with a lot of fixations on what we think we'd like to do in the future.
mm,
Maybe some of those stay. Like I'm not saying all of those will be proven wrong or you'll completely change your major, but
mhm.
just having at the back of your mind that your fact that you're being open to it, and university is a place of like exploration on a high
Yeah,
level.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, awesome. To end on a slightly more exciting note of what's been like a really good discussion, honestly, you've touched on like so many different things. We began with your course, touched on
Mhm.
applications, you talked about patients, professors, electives. We talked a little bit about your podcast, which is interesting as well. I'll be sure to check it out later. But as we wrap up, do not be let go without our usual fast fire round of questions. This is just a way for me to like wrap up the episode on a more exciting and fast paced note. Plus, also a final few pieces of information we're throwing at the viewer about USC, LA, and yourself. So,
Mhm.
I think the first question I'll have to start with is, as a biotech geek, what's one recent innovation or breakthrough in the field that somebody who wants to be well updated should be following pretty closely?
Yeah, I mean, the chapter I was writing in my professor's book about antibody drug conjugates is a very, very, very interesting concept. It kind of revolutionizes and is already revolutionizing the oncology drug segment in the industry, right? So, or how normal drugs work. Like, I'll compare an oncology drug to a bomb, right? Like, if you explode a bomb, right, it'll hurt everything around it. It doesn't care who it is, right? So, it'll kill your healthy cells, it'll kill your cancer cells too, right? So, that's one drawback of normal oncology, small molecule drugs, right? And there's another therapy called antibodies. So what these do is they're more precise. They're like a missile, right? But they just don't have the firepower. So think of it as a missile without any boom in it. So like they won't kill it as effectively. So what you can do is you can take the precise nature of the antibody and the explosiveness of the oncology drug and combine them into an antibody drug conjugate. So now they're both accurate and give you the boom that you need to kill that cell. So I feel like this overall concept is so interesting, right? Like there's thousands of different combinations between antibodies and the conjugates you could have, right? There's the linkers. That's also very interesting. Like how do you link these two, right? They're on a molecular level. Like how do you create those linkers? Like that's very interesting to me, right? And at like what I envision for the future is this being used for other precision tech drugs as well, like for maybe um, like sclerosis, like some other like different like maybe heart problems, right? Like uh, there's endless applications to it, right? Uh, you don't really need to have an oncology drug there. You can have like your normal small molecule drug, and the antibody just helps you deliver it to the target, right? So it's about effectiveness, and I feel like that overall concept is already being used in the industry, but it has a long way to go.
Number one, that's fascinating. And number two, I don't know if someone has told you before, but that's a great analogy. Like for someone like me, who's completely a non-bio person, that
Mhm.
fits really well, like the missile and the bomb. So I
Yeah.
really enjoy that. As a podcaster yourself, and I'm hoping the answer to this maybe years down the line is Uni Unveiled. But for now, before this podcast becomes big, what's your current favorite podcast?
Of course, I'm going to say my own podcast. It's bigger than biotech. But like one podcast, like without being biased, genuinely I really like is the Morning Brew Daily. It's my daily source of news about what's going on around the world, and it's a very entertaining way. Like when I'm driving, like I just put on an episode and I drive, so I get updated while doing something very redundant in my life. So I feel like podcasts like that, I feel like that's what I aim for. It's bigger than biotech to be as well. For biotech professionals, just put on an episode while you're driving in the car and be
Yeah.
updated about the industry, be updated about the opportunities. Because even in the biotech world, like one thing that's very big, especially for your biotech listeners or anyone who wants to go in that field, is there's career pivots happening all the time. Like you could be in research and development, right? And you could pivot to a finance kind of job in the industry, I mean, in the same company. So there's two types of people there. There's generalists, and there's the people who are really specific in one thing. So the generalists learn about all facets of the departments of the company they're working, whereas specific people just go into one department, go down the rabbit hole, learn everything there is. So I feel like for the generalists, for switching to different roles, like making them kind of know what's there in the other role, what they require, what skill sets they need, whether it's appealing to them. I feel like talking to other professionals is the best way to do it, right? And I hope my podcast provides that platform for them. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great vision. My current role model is Ranveer and the Ranveer show, and so someday, this could be years down the line.
Yeah,
But
100%.
we've talked extensively about the weather, so I'm gonna challenge you with, apart from the weather, what's one thing you love about living in LA, and also one thing that's less comfortable about living in LA.
Yeah, so one thing I love about LA is the people. And one thing I hate about LA is the public transportation. Not the best. I would love to use it, but it's not the best and it's not the safest. So, like, we have to travel by Uber, which is kind of expensive. But yeah, it is what it is, right? The drawbacks of LA.
Now, that's a point that's been brought up again and again on the podcast. So you have agreement there from the other USC and UCLA
Yeah.
students I've had. Um, What's you actually touched upon culture shocks, India versus US. I'm sure it'd be very interesting to know, especially for Indian listeners or probably even international students, one big culture shock once entering the US.
Mm, so one big culture shock was food. Like I said, I'm vegetarian, and like breakfasts were very different. Not to like it's much more different than the food I'm used to having. And especially in terms of like more. like I don't want to get into it too much, but like the taboo things about American culture versus Indian culture is the relationships you have and how those work. Like dating is very different, I'd say,
Mhm.
in both of these places. Like if you want me to get deeper into it, I can, but I mean, I feel like I'm just gonna say that for now.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think I'm sure that there might very well might be a personal angle here, but I think for the sake of
Yeah.
the podcast, we'll keep it to that, and people
Yeah.
can contact you if they're interested in specifics. What's any wise quote that has stuck with you over the years?
Yeah. So like this quote I really keep close to my heart is the best time to do something was yesterday. The second best time is now. So yeah, I feel
Okay.
like that's a quote that's really kind of gotten me to do a lot of things, especially because I'm a very ambitious person and like I need to push myself quite a lot. And yeah, it really helps me to push myself.
That's a good one. Yeah, lovely. That's a wrap on the fast fire. Lastly, if you had to summarize what's been a really enjoyable as well as informative episode so far,
Mhm.
what would be? I'm assuming most listeners of the podcast are high schoolers who are just
Mhm.
about to embark on university and then also enter life at large. Any one final message you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I'd tell them to keep the quote I said close to their heart as well because it's the most important quote ever. Like the best time to do something was yesterday. The second best time is to do it right now. You know, like don't be lazy in ninth and tenth grade to kind of get that work done. Like you'll think that university is far away. You have 4 years, but
Hmm.
it's really not. 4 years run by in like a tap. Like it's you're already in university, right? So I feel like it's just the mindset that you have to change. I feel like it's all about the mindset. And yeah, like if you keep this quote close to your heart, like I feel like you will have no problems.
I think I would say the same about university, that 4 years just fly by. And so don't
Mhm.
wait. Don't think of freshman year as the time to slack off and then we'll get to work in sophomore year. Like day
Yeah,
one, be pedal to the metal. Whatever you want to get out of that university, be aiming to continuously be like, absorbing and just keeping your five senses open because the 4 years will fly by. Like I'm sure for you, 2 years have flown by. For me, a year has flown by.
yeah,
Before you know it, you'll be graduating.
yeah,
And so, yeah, yeah. Uh, Lovely quote to like end off. Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, I feel like I could pick your brain about 100 other things, as well as I probably will pick your brain after this podcast about a few podcasting tips and tricks.
yeah. Feel free.
But for now, we'll wrap up this episode. If a listener is interested to connect or has follow-up questions, what's a good way to reach out to you?
Yeah, you could reach out to me on my LinkedIn, which is Hriday Gondalia. I'll spell it out for you. It's Hriday space Gondalia, or my Instagram, which is at the rate HRDY_G. Like both of those, I'm active on. You could reach out anytime, and yeah, just let me know you came from this podcast, and yeah, I'll be more than happy to help you out however I can.
Awesome. And I'll put links to those in the description as well. So
Yeah.
people are free to reach out. But other than that, thank you for your wise words on the podcast on Uni Unveiled. And it was a pleasure to host you today.
No, thank you for having me. I absolutely love giving information, tips, and tricks to other people. So thank you for giving me the platform to do it.
All right. That was the episode. To all the young listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. And I hope you feel more energized, inspired, and curious for the exciting university journey that lies ahead. Stay tuned. Many more wonderful episodes to be released on Uni Unveiled across a diversity of majors, countries, institutions, and speaker profiles. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel Uni Unveiled. This podcast is just a small part of a much larger initiative undertaken by my family called Serene Strokes to spread positive sparks of growth, transformation, and joy. among all our audience. Check out our official website www.serenestrokes.com. In the description and comments, please feel free to share other topics and questions which you would love to hear about from our different speakers on this podcast. Until then, take care and remember that this big word, university, may not be as scary or as intimidating as you think it is. Thank you for listening to Uni Unveiled.